Hey there, Mr. Redder here. Welcome back to another episode of Reddit Podcast Stories, where today, Karen customer loses it because I won't sell her my purse. So for the last dozen years or so, I've been carrying this vintage designer bag I found online. I think I bought it back in 2010. I love it, and I will carry it until it falls apart. I get a ton of compliments on it, and it's also caused this one crazy story. I spent 3 years working in an Ivy League college town upscale clothing boutique that catered to wealthy college students and their parents and tourists. We didn't sell anything like this bag, but I suppose I can see where it would have fit in with the other things that we did sell. One afternoon, I was getting ready to leave for my lunch break, and I had put this vintage bag on the counter while I was putting my coat on. An expensively dressed woman who had just walked up to the counter picked up my bag and asked my coworker who was at the register how much it was. I walked over and politely took it from her. I said it was my personal bag and it wasn't for sale. She literally snatched it out of my hands and went off on both of us. The bag was sitting on the counter. It had been for sale. It was obviously much too fancy and expensive a bag for a retail loser to own. And oh, didn't we just wish we were Ivy League students like her precious babies? Which was actually funny because I didn't work there because I needed the money. I worked there as a favor to the owner, who was a friend of the family, basically as a fill-in for one of her full-time employees who had a chronic illness and called in sick a lot. It allowed her to keep the other worker rather than letting her go for someone more reliable. This entitled woman probably really would have flipped if I had told her that my husband was a professor at our beloved Ivy League school, and I could easily afford that bag, thank you very much. So yada yada yada, this woman just kept screaming at us. She wanted that bag so badly. She absolutely refused to believe that it belonged to me. She started screaming about wanting to see the manager or the owner, and didn't believe my coworker when she informed the woman that she was the store manager. We finally told her if she didn't give me my bag back and leave the store, we were going to call the cops. She refused, so the police were called. Police get there, entitled woman gets even worse and doubles down on her particular form of insanity. She tells them that it's her bag and she had brought it in with her, and that we were trying to steal it from her. The cop took the bag away from her and opened it up and dumped all the contents on the counter. My cell phone, which of course I knew the passcode to and she didn't, prescription medication bottles in my name, my checkbook, and everything else I carried on a daily basis. How she had failed to recognize just from the weight of the bag that it had stuff in it, I don't know. You could see the fear creeping into her face as the cop came up with one item after another that proved the bag was mine. When he got to my wallet and pulled out what was clearly my license, the woman jerked away from the second cop who had a hand on her arm and pretty much ran out of the store. I kind of wish they had gone after her, but apparently they didn't think the situation warranted it because they just asked us if we considered it worth pursuing and pressing charges. Sadly, in that moment, we didn't want to be bothered. We just wanted it to be over so we could go on with our day. I wish now that we had. She needed to be taught a lesson or be forced to get mental help. She wasn't the only crazy entitled customer we ever got, but she was one of the most memorable. Am I the jerk if I call off my engagement because of a comment my fiance made about my late wife? Background: I, 43 male, have 2 kids with my late wife, Kayla. Sam, who's 21, and Liz, who's 16. All fake names. Kayla passed when our kids were 15 and 10. I won't give specifics about what happened, but she was struck by a drunk driver when she was on her way home from work. She really was the love of my life, and to say that her passing hit our family hard would be an understatement. I promised myself that if I got back into the dating game, I wouldn't date anyone for at least a couple of years for the sake of my kids. 3 years after my wife's passing, I met my now fiance. We'll call her Amanda. Things went slow, and I didn't introduce her to my kids until we had been dating for about a year at that point. Now we've been together for 3 years, and we're engaged. Amanda and my kids always had a good relationship. Neither of my kids are super close to her, but they've always been friendly and welcoming to her, and Amanda has never overstepped any boundaries they have, like trying to replace their mother. At the beginning of Amanda and I's relationship, she was a bit insecure of the fact that I was a widower. During the first few months of us dating, she would constantly ask things like, if Kayla had never passed, would I still be with her right now? I always kept my answers brief and told her that I didn't like thinking about the what-ifs, and that she was the one I was dating now, and that was what mattered. Eventually, she stopped making these comments, and I stopped worrying about it. Now on to the issue. My parents were hosting a family dinner to celebrate my fiance and I's engagement. It was my mom and dad, my late wife's sister and her husband, Sam and Liz, and me and Amanda. Dinner was going well. We were all making small talk with each other and talked about wedding plans. About halfway into dinner, my mom made a comment about how she was so happy I was able to find the spark I had with Kayla and someone else. I don't think anybody really paid much attention to the comment, but then Amanda laughed and said, "I'm happy it happened to her. Otherwise, I never would have gotten him to myself." The tone of the dinner immediately shifted and everyone got extremely tense, especially my kids. Amanda noticed the shift and started awkwardly laughing like she was trying to play her comment off as a joke. I was honestly just frozen, as that was the first time she had made a comment like that. My kids looked disgusted, and Liz got up and walked out to the car. Sam waited a bit longer like he wanted me to say something, but I was still in shock about what Amanda had just said. To make a long story about the dinner short, the dinner was kind of ruined, so I said my goodbyes to everyone, grabbed my fiance, and we all drove home. My daughter hasn't spoken to me or Amanda since, and it's been 3 days. I got tired of it and pulled my son aside to ask him what I should do. He said something along the lines of, "I'm a grown man and don't care who another grown man marries, but I don't want a woman who speaks like that about our mother around my sister." Sam's comment stuck with me, and now I'm considering calling off the engagement entirely. She's never made comments like this before, but I'm worried if I let it slide this one time, it will become more frequent and it will affect my daughter. I need some advice from outside perspectives and just want to do the right thing for my kids. Would I be the jerk if I called off the engagement because of the comment she made? Edit. Thank you for all of the advice, even the people calling me a bad father. I think your guys' words are what I needed to pull my head out of my backside. I'll try to talk to my kids alone tonight before speaking with my fiance, and we'll see where it goes from there. I'm pretty sure my fiance and I are over though. Update. To answer a few questions, did my fiance apologize to anyone at the dinner party? No, she didn't. I honestly didn't think it even registered or has registered to her what she said was wrong. 2. Does fiance have social anxiety? Not to my knowledge, no. In all the time I've known her, she's never shown any signs of social anxiety and doesn't have a history of it. How old was my late wife? She was 37 when she passed, and we were the same age. Amanda is 41. A lot of people were asking for clarification on the time frame of her passing and when fiance and I met. At this point in time, Kayla had been gone for about 6 years, and I met Amanda roughly 3 years after Kayla's passing. While I'm writing this update, it's the day after I talked to my kids. So last night around 5:30, my fiance left for work. She works nights most days of the week, so I was able to call my son and ask if he could come over so I can talk to him and his sister. He goes to our local college and lives in an apartment near his school. When he started college, he wanted to move out, but also wanted to stay close to us, so he settled on an apartment a few blocks away from the college. He came over, and I called him and his sister into the living room to talk with the both of them. When they were both seated, I told them point blank that I didn't think the wedding was happening anymore, and that the comment she made was unacceptable. I then, by the advice of the comments, apologized to them. I told them I was sorry for not saying anything for so long and letting the tension thicken in our home. I told my daughter that I understood why she hasn't spoken to me and that I was sorry for allowing her to think I was even remotely okay with what she said. I felt pretty spineless after we had gotten back from the dinner that night, so I wanted to do everything in my power to make it right to the kids during the conversation. My daughter told me that she felt disgusted at the comment Amanda made, and even more so when I didn't defend her mother. She then told me that the past 2 years that she's known Amanda, she felt like she's been gradually trying to push her and Sam away from me. One of the examples Liz gave me was when my son moved out. He moved out when he was about to start his sophomore year of college, and when he mentioned the idea of moving out, Amanda was the one who took that and ran with it. According to Liz, Amanda was the one encouraging Sam the most to move out. To be clear, I was never against Sam moving out, but I was clear to him that he was welcome to live at home for his college years, and even after until he found where he wanted to be. I asked Sam if he felt pushed out by Amanda, and if that's why he moved out. He said he hadn't felt pushed out before he told everyone he wanted to move, but after he put it out there, my fiance kept pushing for him to move out. Liz cut in and said that every time she brings up college, Amanda keeps encouraging her to go out of state. Liz doesn't plan on going out of state, and she's been open about wanting to go to the college Sam is attending right now. Liz said she feels like Amanda is waiting till she graduates high school and goes to college so she can move out. A lot of the comments were right about the subtle comments, eventually turning into Amanda wanting my kids pushed away from me. Liz said that she was scared that by the time I eventually noticed the way Amanda was acting, too big of a wedge would have already been driven between me and them. I told my kids that I'm sorry it's taken me this long to notice, and that I was also sorry they've been walking on eggshells for so long. I hugged them and told them that no matter what, they're my top priority, not Amanda or anybody else. A lot of the comments pointed out that even though my son is grown, he still needs his father, and I made sure to let my son know that I will always be there for him and his sister, even when they are well grown. The entire conversation lasted 2 hours. We covered a lot of the bases we wanted to, and it got emotional on all sides. In short, Amanda and I are done. I've made it a point to tell my kids that none of this situation is their fault, and that Amanda is the grown woman who said what she said. My kids and I are okay now, but they aren't 100% okay with me and probably won't be for a while. I'm completely fine with that, and I just want my kids to be comfortable at their own home. Amanda is tomorrow off from work, so I plan on talking to her tomorrow. I also plan on calling my mother to ask her why she thought it was okay to even bring up Kayla at the dinner. I don't want my daughter here when it all goes down, so she's staying tonight and tomorrow night with Sam. So that's where I'm at now. Not super happy about the outcome of me and Amanda, but would rather my kids be happy and healthy than for me to have a wife. Again, thank you everyone for the advice and the harsh words. Am I the jerk for not telling my wife the real reason why I married her? About 14 years ago, I, male 42 now, got my MEng degree and I was struggling to find work. I did eventually land a job working for a medium-sized company, but even then, I was still struggling financially as I owed so much debt and student loans and lived in a pretty expensive city. It was admittedly a pretty low point in my life. I'm sure many people can relate to the feeling that you've done so much schoolwork and then don't have much to show for it. I did, however, build a good relationship with my boss, male 84 today, as in my mind, this was the easiest way to earn promotions and in turn a high income. Eventually, I met my boss's family. One thing that quickly became obvious was that his daughter, Rose, who's 39 now, liked me a lot. I didn't think too much of it at the time because I thought mixing my professional and personal lives would be a bad idea. Also, I did not reciprocate her feelings in any way. Though for obvious reasons, I was always exceptionally polite to her at every interaction. Long story short, my boss's wife, who's 78 today, found out, and I started getting invited by my boss to his house pretty regularly for things like dinners, etc. Throughout all of these, my boss and his wife would somehow always steer conversations in ways that led to me talking to Rose, or would leave the room for some reason or another, just leaving the two of us together. Later, my boss would even tell me things like how I felt like family, and he'd be happy to recommend me to higher positions, etc., since his wife and daughter are so fond of me. Needless to say, I started talking more to Rose, and within weeks, I got a promotion. While I will admit to not feeling much of a romantic connection with Rose, I did put a lot of effort into fostering that relationship, and she was happy with the attention I was giving her. After a few months of this, we were married. As you can imagine, my career really took off then. However, I did leave the company roughly 2 years after getting married, and with the recommendations I was able to get from my former boss/father-in-law and several other people he introduced me to, I was able to secure a good position elsewhere. Today, I can happily say that after being married for 12 years and having 3 kids together, there's no other woman I'd rather spend my life with. Because I feel like this, I've always felt that my primary motivator for getting married to Rose is no longer relevant. That being said, I had lunch with 2 of my longtime friends, Michael, who's 43, and Wilson, who's 38, a few days ago. We haven't seen each other in about a year, so it was a nice opportunity to catch up. I'd like to add that Michael and Wilson are both familiar with my situation as we were in regular contact back then. At one point in the conversation, Michael asked if Rose ever found out the real reason why I decided to marry her. I told him of course not, and that her finding out would be needlessly painful for her. Wilson agreed with Michael, saying things like honesty and transparency were the main things he and his wife picked up from couples therapy, and that it would be better long-term if Rose found out. I reaffirmed to them that Rose not knowing would be best for our family, and the conversation largely ended there. That being said, I've started to think more about what they've said, and I do feel a little guilty. Am I the jerk? Update. I've had time to do some self-reflection over the past few days, and my conclusion is that I'm probably the luckiest man in the world to have such a fantastic wife and wonderful kids. Rest assured that I have no intention of my wife ever finding out the real reason why I decided to marry her. Also, I'm very confident that my two friends won't say anything to her about it. I failed to mention it earlier, but I also have some ammunition on Michael's marriage, and given that Wilson is in couples therapy, I'm highly doubtful he'd say anything. Even without this, I can't imagine either of them overstepping such a boundary. I'm sure many of you are wondering how they knew about this in the first place. The reason they knew was because we were all housemates at the time, and they were able to witness the situation unfold firsthand. I guess you could say that while I'm largely an introverted person, I still talk a lot, especially with my friends. I do still feel guilty about my initial motivation to pursue my wife, but also very grateful for how things turned out. I like to think she's also grateful. Over the last few weeks, I've been trying to turn this gratitude into action by making my wife feel appreciated. Yesterday, I brought her breakfast in bed, and in the evening after work, I brought her a surprisingly expensive bouquet of flowers. Today, we have reservations for her favorite restaurant and a sitter who will watch the kids. I know these things are minor in the grand scheme of things, but I want to do more thoughtful things for my wife. This will be my early New Year's resolution. My love for her certainly grew over time. When I first met her, I thought she was physically stunning, and I still do. I was just very caught up in my own life, largely finances. Also, I thought that mixing my professional and personal lives was not a good idea. Also, our personalities were the opposites. She was certainly attracted to me, and when her father covertly encouraged me, with some incentives, I went with it. Regardless, I love her and the family we've created together more than anything. Interviewer accuses me of parking in a handicapped spot and tells me to prove it. A few years ago, I was in school and job hunting. I got an interview at a company for office work, filing, answering phones, setting appointments, etc. I was looking forward to getting an office job instead of retail or fast food. The building had big window walls that overlooked the parking lot so you could see cars pulling in and parking. I pull into the lot and I park my car. I get out and walk into the office. Now, as I'm walking in, I note that there's a car parked in the handicap space in the front of the office. This car looks just like mine, I should note. So I walk in and I'm greeted by the manager, who kind of gives me a scowling look. It made me uneasy a little as we walk back to his office. We sit down and he's asking me questions in a bit of a clipped tone. He seems annoyed by my answers and I don't understand what's going on at this point. Finally, he says, "Do you always park in handicapped spaces?" I'm confused, so I ask him what he means. He goes on a rant about how entitled I am for parking in the handicapped spot at a potential place of employment, and I'm just getting more lost. I asked him what's going on because I didn't park in the handicapped spot. I'm parked in the lot. He argues with me and says he watched my car pull in and saw me park there. I again told him that I didn't park in the handicapped spot, but the car that I walked by in that spot looks similar to my car. He says that he knows that he saw me park and get out of that car. At this point, I'm over the whole interview. I knew this would be a horrible place to work for if this was the guy managing it. Then he goes a step further and says, "Prove it." I grab my purse and get my keys out. I don't even bother waiting for him and just leave the office. He's jogging after me and hurried outside to stand and wait. His face went from smug arrogance to Pikachu real quick as I walked past the car in the handicap spot. He asked me where I was going as I walked over to my car, then I turned around and made eye contact as I hit the button on my keys to unlock it and got in. He was starting to walk over to me, calling out that he was sorry about the misunderstanding, but I just put the car in reverse and left. I didn't even make eye contact with him as I drove away. Edit. This was my second interview, so the manager knows what I and my car look like. I didn't know why he said he saw me. I'm assuming it was a lie to get me to admit I did it. I've pondered this many a night. Trust me. My niece ruined my anniversary present for my girlfriend. My girlfriend, who's 19, and I, 19 male, are celebrating our 5-year anniversary this Halloween. Every anniversary, she always gives me these impressive figurines that she makes, and it always blows me away. I always feel like my presents are always way lamer than her presents, so I decided to make her something this year. With guidance from her friends, I printed pictures of us onto a large canvas and used white tape to make cute frames. I know it may not seem that impressive, but I'm not artistic, but she is, and I wanted to make her something that I thought she would like. I had the gift hidden in a closet. The problem came whenever I looked after my sister, who's 33, her kids, who are 4 and 5. I took them down in the basement to do some painting. My niece walked away from the table to what I thought was the drawer with the art supplies, so I didn't think much of it. So while I was focused on my nephew and gushing over how he and his sister are the best artists in the world, my niece went into the closet where my girlfriend's present was and with her paintbrush painted all over it. The second I heard the door, my head shot up. When I saw my niece over the canvas smudging paint all over it, my heart sank. I took my niece out of the closet, shoved the canvas back into the closet, and slammed the door shut and carried her back to the table. I was horrified. My niece and nephew kept asking me if I was okay. I reassured them I was fine and ended up bringing them ice cream to convince them that everything was okay. When my girlfriend came home, after I gave my nephew a bath, I asked if she could help give my niece one. She laughed at how she was covered in paint, and I joked that she went to town painting. While I was waiting for my girlfriend and niece to finish, I watched cartoons with my nephew and started thinking about what I was going to do, because nothing I could get her could possibly be good enough for our 5-year anniversary, and what I was going to give her was completely ruined. She deserves an amazing present, and I don't know what to do. I'm done for. I think a cool consolation might be to do a painting class or date type of thing with her. She's artistic and you aren't, but it might be really cool to her that you put yourself out of your comfort zone if you still want to do something for her after showing and explaining what happened. That's rough, but you did good, honestly. You put good thought in and consulted her friends, so you've definitely shown you care. OP. Consulting her friends was not only because they know and care about my girlfriend, but they are also artists, so I thought her artistic friends would give great advice for what a non-artist can make, but still turn out really good. They did. Update. I told my girlfriend, as the few of y'all suggested. Later that day, when my sister picked up her kids, I took her to the basement and to the closet to show her what my niece did. I explained that I've always felt like, while she does like the presents I give her, I feel bad because she puts so much effort into my presents. I explained to her what exactly I was trying to make. Luckily, my niece didn't cover the entirety of the canvas, and my girlfriend saw bits of the canvas. In particular, a picture her friend took of us in the cafeteria in high school with her head on my shoulder. She gushed about how sweet it was, and she suggested that we could turn this into an anniversary project. We could make another canvas and maybe include some of her pictures. I told her how much of a great idea it was, and she was jumping with joy and excitement. Am I the jerk for refusing to give my son's mom extra custody after her boyfriend asked me? I co-parent my 8-year-old son with my ex. We share 50-50 custody with a VERT-specific custody calendar to ensure we both get the same amount of days with our son. Last year, my ex asked if I could give her my Christmas week in exchange for a week in the future because she wanted to go visit her family out of state and could only do it on the days I had my son. I said yes. From that point on, she has refused to give me my week back. She always has some excuse or wanted to do when it worked for her. In other words, she scammed me out of custody time. I said so be it. Earlier this week, she asked again if she could have our son this week of Christmas. I have him the week of, and she has him the week after, again to visit family. I said of course, but need to give me 2 weeks in return. 1 from last year and 1 for this year. And I get those 2 weeks before you get any extra time, so you can't do me over again. One of those weeks can be the week of Thanksgiving when you have him. She refused and tried gaslighting me by saying she gave me back the week I gave up last year. I told her there was no room to negotiate, take it or leave it. The next day, her boyfriend called me. He said he was going to propose this Thanksgiving, which is why my ex doesn't want to give up Thanksgiving. They both wanted to travel to see his family for Christmas and New Year's and celebrate their engagement. That's why I can't have her Thanksgiving time and why she needs my Christmas week. I told him my custody arrangement was none of his business, and I don't have to explain anything to him. In fact, I'm not open to any custody changes anymore. You can go tell my son's mom that you messed around and found out. Now he's trying to walk back everything he said because he knows he seriously messed up by inserting himself into this matter. Of course, he said he was just trying to help out. Not the jerk. Her boyfriend has messed up big time by sticking his beak in this. If she refuses to give you the time back you are owed, you are well within your rights to refuse any further custody changes. My brother has exactly the same issue with his ex and their 2 sons. She expects him to be flexible for her, but not the other way around. You're fired for obeying my rules. Please stay until we can replace you though. It was 2005, and the lady I had met over the internet, having visited me in Australia and me visiting her in the US and meeting her folks and all that, she had now come to be with me and we had married. But since arriving to stay, she had a lot of problems as her vocational college degree was not recognized in Australia, leaving her with difficulties getting a job. She was determined and flexible though, and did some temp jobs, clerical, receptionist kinds of things, using skills she had learned while working at college as a librarian. She finally got a real job as a receptionist/clerk at a company that brokered loans, and she got on with things. One thing that was always a problem was that sales reps and sharks would have their clients come in, and they would tell the women to make coffee for them. That wasn't part of their role. So my wife and coworkers were told that they were not to do that. It was up to the salesperson to make the coffee for themselves and their clients. This was part of an initiative to try to retain women in these roles as they didn't tend to stay long in what was something of an anarchic office. So my wife is working, and as salesmen, they called them financial advisors, but they were the credit business version of the used car salesman class. Client comes in and she buzzed the guy. He comes out and says to her to make them both coffees. She tried to be discreet, but said that he knew she couldn't do that. He blew up, went to her supervisor, and she told my wife to make the coffees. Later, she had her in the office and fired her. Yep, she was fired for trying to do as she was told. The opposite of malicious, I guess. But the karma comes in anyway. She was fired, but asked to stay on until they got another person to replace her. For the next 2 months, she continued to go to work, now able and ready to refuse anything she didn't want to do, especially the coffee making. The same guy tried once. She said no, so fire me. They could not find a replacement. Word of their issues at that company had got around to the receptionist and clerical field locally. Edit. She reminded me the agency she had got the job through refused to send anyone. It was the third person in a row dumped when the probationary period was nearly up, so the agency was not being paid their commission. Then she was offered a much better job with some real responsibility and standing, and almost 30% more salary. Walking in the office the next day and told them she was leaving at the end of the day. No notice required, of course, and they still had not got a replacement and did not find one for months more, by which time they were trying to replace 2 of them. Eventually, the company let that supervisor go and initiated sensible rules. My wife never looked back, but we still have a chuckle 18 years later at how well getting fired worked out for her and how badly it ended for the supervisor who fired her staff for obeying the rules. I'm your new manager and you'll listen to me. No, I really won't. Bit of background before I start. This story happened when I was still working as a machinist back when I was 19. I started that job on second shift, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., but was transferred to weekend shift, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., barely 6 months later. And the manager for weekend was an older man, we'll call him Jay. This is important for later. Since weekend was severely understaffed, we were each put in charge of multiple machines. I was in charge of running 4 machines that formed a big block in a corner of the factory that hardly anyone ever went to. One Friday morning, as I was setting up my machines, a short, rotund man with a Vernon Dursley mustache walked up to me and tapped me on the shoulder. Surprised that I had a visitor, I pulled my head out of the machine and greeted him. We've got entitled manager. Me. Hi, can I help you with something? Entitled manager. I'm his name. Me. Okay, nice to meet you. I'm OP. I hold out my hand for him to shake, which he ignores. Entitled manager. Yeah, I'm just looking around, trying to get a feel for the place, you know? Me. Understandable, I guess. I trailed off, not really sure what he wanted and knowing I had about 20 minutes to get the machines going before I fell behind on my work order. You've got a pretty nice setup here. I wouldn't have known there was anyone working back here if I hadn't wandered over this way. Me. I guess. I bet you have fun back here. You can just slack off all day, and no one comes by to bother you. He laughs in a kind of condescending way. Me. Sorry, but is there a point to this conversation, or can I finish setting up? Yeah, I probably could have been a bit more tactful here, but I worked my butt off, and I had the highest job completion rate out of every shift who ran those machines, which was quite a feat, considering I was alone and the other shifts had between 2 and 4 people running those same machines. Entitled manager sneers at me.
You don't know who I am, do you?
Me. Nope. Should I?
Yeah, you should. I'm your new boss.
Me. I stare at him for a second, then laugh. Really? Did Jay finally retire?
What? Jay? What's he got to do with this?
Me. Jay's my manager. It was at this moment I realized he had gotten ahead of himself and didn't even know who he was in charge of yet.
No, he's not. I am. I was just promoted to first shift manager. That means you work for me.
Me. No, that's not what that means, I said slowly. I'm on weekend shift, not first, so you're not my boss. Jay is.
If you're weekend, then why are you running first shift's equipment?
He asked me in an aha, gotcha kind of way. Me. This is where I've been assigned. You want specifics? You're gonna have to ask the manager. I didn't choose which machines I run.
I am your manager.
Me. No, you're not. Now, can I please get back to work? Entitled manager steps into my personal space and looks up at me with a frown on his face, like it was somehow my fault that I was a foot taller than he was.
I'm the first shift manager.
Me. Good for you, man, and I mean that, but that doesn't mean you're my manager. He pokes me in the chest.
I'm the first shift manager. That means you have to listen to me.
Me. I look down at his finger, then take a step back so he isn't touching me anymore. Don't do that. Entitled manager, seemingly amused by my response, steps closer and tries to poke me again. It was at that moment that my actual manager showed up. Jay. What's going on, OP? Machines ready to get moving? Me. Not yet. I was just being introduced to entitled manager here. Guess I got distracted. Jay sees how irritated I look and quickly realized what was going on. Is that right? Hey, entitled manager, why don't you let me introduce you to the other weekend guys? OP's got to get these machines going so he can make raid. Entitled manager smirks at me.
Yeah, sure. Have a good day, OP. I'll see you later.
Jay leads him away and I get back to work without any more interruptions for the rest of my shift. But entitled manager had apparently decided that my defiance was unacceptable and something he needed to personally correct. So I hadn't seen the last of him just yet. Over the next 5 months, every encounter with entitled manager went about the same way. He would try to give me orders, I would refuse, and he would keep pressing until I got irritated. But eventually, Jay got tired of hearing entitled manager complain about me not listening to him and called me into the office for a chat. He basically told me to just suck it up and do what he asked, that it was only because I wasn't listening to him that he kept bugging me, and that if I just gave in, he would get bored eventually and leave me alone. So I begrudgingly went along with it and started doing all of the BS tasks he wanted me to do. These tasks included painting tables for first shift, fixing entire baskets full of parts that first shift messed up, shoveling brass chips from a wheelbarrow to a barrel for absolutely no reason, and setting up machines for first shift. And I was expected to do those while still doing my own job. If I didn't really need the money, I would have quit the moment Jay told me to go along with his BS. But since I didn't, entitled manager only got more brazen as time went on. Things finally came to a head one Saturday morning. Someone on third shift had forgotten to lock up the machine after a sensor malfunctioned, so I went about setting it up for the next order code like I always did, completely unaware of the time bomb I had my head inside of. One of the pneumatic doors bugged out due to the faulty sensor and slammed shut on my hand. I should mention I had the machine in setup mode, which should have stopped that from happening. But that's why it's so important to lock out a machine when there's a sensor or an electrical issue in those machines. I was lucky my hand wasn't crushed. As it was, my hand basically turned into a single giant bruise that even made it down to the bones. With the help of another coworker, I got my hand out and went and reported the accident to Jay. Company policy stated that I had to go to the hospital to have it checked out. After having the machine inspected, Jay knew I couldn't have done anything to prevent it, but I still had to go take a drug test after the hospital visit as a formality. Well, entitled manager got wind that I was involved in the accident and decided now would be a great time to press his luck. He comes barging into Jay's office, demanding to know why I was stupid enough to put my hand inside a machine that everyone knew was messed up. Me, because I didn't know it was messed up. Entitled manager.
That's BS. You just wanted an excuse to go home.
I ignored him and kept my eyes focused on Jay while he finished filling out my paperwork.
I always knew you were a wimp, but this is a new level, even for you, OP. What, you can't stand working like a real man, so you're just going home?
I keep ignoring him.
Hey, OP. OP, I'm talking to you.
He steps around in front of me and pokes me in the chest while still ranting at me. Him touching me was the last straw. Me.
Jay, get this stupid jerk out of my face. Oh, you've done it now, he said triumphantly. You can't talk to me like that. I'm a manager. I'll have you fired.
Me. Do it. Please, for the love of God, fire me. Jay. OP, calm down. Just think about what you're saying. Me. Jay, I swear, if he's still in this office in 3 seconds, I'm going to pick up this chair, and I'm not going to stop until it's broken or he is. That shut Entitled Manager up, for a minute anyway. Entitled Manager.
Jay, are you going to let him talk to me like that? He just threatened me.
Jay. Entitled Manager, I'd advise you to shut up and leave. OP's a big guy, and I'm too old to try and stop him if he decides to follow through. Entitled Manager darted out of the room a few seconds later. Jay, you know you can't threaten people like that, OP. I'll back you up this time because he was out of line, but I won't be able to protect you next time. Me. Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'll call you when I leave the hospital, I said before leaving the office and driving myself 20 miles to the nearest hospital. Entitled Manager never tried to harass me after that day. In fact, he did his best to avoid going anywhere near me after that day. But he didn't exactly learn his lesson either. I'll tell that story if anyone is interested in it. Update. So, unfortunately, a few months after my accident, I was moved to a different department. This one dealt almost exclusively with lead products, while I had mostly worked with steel and lead-free products before then. Turns out, I'm pretty allergic to being absolutely covered in lead dust, so I was told they couldn't risk having me in the department anymore and let me go. To this day, I think the only reason I was moved was because of my altercation with Entitled Manager, but I don't have any proof. Now, a few of you asked why Entitled Manager was able to get away with so much. The reason for that is simple. Nepotism. Entitled Manager's dad was head of the foundry for the better part of 30 years, and while he didn't have quite as much pull as the owners, he was well liked and most people treated his word as law. So Entitled Manager was given a job straight out of high school and he had never worked anywhere else. His dad covered for him at every opportunity until the day he retired. Then his friends continued the trend. There was one incident where Entitled Manager took a hammer to a vending machine and the plant manager bought a new one without so much as a harsh look in Entitled Manager's direction. There was a whole mess surrounding my leaving that ended with the plant manager and Entitled Manager lying to a judge about why I left. They tried to say that I was a bad employee who didn't deserve my unemployment wages, which ultimately led to a trial, which I won. Now, most of this information comes from a few of my friends that still worked at the factory, but I know it's true because it made it to the local papers. The plant manager, the one who had been protecting Entitled Manager, had his power severely stripped after the crap storm with the judge settled. He had an assistant plant manager assigned to help him manage his workload, which is a fancy way of saying they tasked someone with watching him. Because his biggest backer was essentially taken out of the picture, Entitled Manager didn't enjoy the same leeway he did with me. In fact, it seemed the new plant manager really didn't like Entitled Manager. So when Entitled Manager pushed another guy a little too far one day, and he had a hammer wrench chucked at his head hard enough to shatter a window, the thrower was just written up for breaking the window instead of fired or arrested for assault. About 8 months after I left, the plant manager who'd been protecting Entitled Manager was let go by the company, and for good reason. He'd had the plant making parts that they didn't even have orders for. And for those who don't know, at the end of the year when it's time to report the earnings and inventory to the IRS, you actually have to pay for the inventory you have on hand, presumably as estimated income since it's assumed you had orders for them. They had 10 30-foot tall, 40-foot wide shelves full of baskets of parts ready to be sold, and not one of them had an order code assigned to them. So the plant manager was gone after that blunder. An intelligent person would have realized after that it was time to stop being a jerk to people and that they were well and truly alone in the factory. But no, not Entitled Manager. He didn't learn a darn thing. Despite hammer wrenches being thrown at him, his tires mysteriously going flat 5 times in a month, and pretty much everyone in the factory hating his guts. Why he wasn't just fired, I honestly don't know, but he wasn't. Until the day he landed the company in ever more hot water. So there was a truck driver who had been working for the parent company of the factory for 20-something years. He was a well-liked, soft-spoken man who had never been so much as written up in his 20 years. He was also black, which is important for this next part. We'll call the truck driver TD for simplicity's sake. This story was told to me by my friend G, who was a machinist. He was working about 10 feet away from truck driver when this happened. One day, while truck driver was waiting for his truck to be loaded up, entitled manager spots him standing around on his phone. I heard he was talking to his wife, but I don't actually know. Entitled manager:
Hey, what are you doing?
Truck driver pulls his phone away from his ear. I'm waiting for my truck to be loaded. Do you need something? Entitled manager:
Well, if you don't have anything better to do while you wait, how about you go grab a broom and start sweeping? You know, actually make yourself useful for something other than blocking the path.
Truck driver: Oh, was I blocking you? Sorry, I didn't realize. Tries to move out of the way.
Didn't you hear me? I said grab a broom and start sweeping.
That's not my job, man. But look, if I'm bothering you, I'll just wait outside until my truck is ready, okay? Entitled manager:
That's what I hate about you.
Definitely not saying that.
You're always trying to do anything you can to get out of work.
Truck driver hangs up his phone and tucks it in his pocket. Don't do that again.
Do what?
You know darn well what you did. I don't know what kind of bad day you're having, but don't use that word. Entitled manager steps closer to truck driver.
What'd you say to me?
Truck driver, not backing down. I said, don't use that word. Entitled manager:
What are you going to do about it if I do?
Then he called him it again. He said while poking him in the chest. What truck driver did was immediately after that word left entitled manager's mouth a second time, he punched him. Now, I've heard conflicting stories about this part. Some say he jumped on entitled man's chest and proceeded to beat him up until someone could get him off of him. But G claims that he only hit him once, and that one punch really messed him up. Just for good measure, there was a forklift parked behind entitled manager at the time, and that's what cushioned his fall. The forklift driver sitting in the driver's seat swears he thought he'd been rear-ended by another forklift after entitled manager fell onto him. An ambulance was called, entitled manager was rushed to the hospital to undergo emergency surgery, and truck driver was, unfortunately, arrested for assault. Don't worry though. Remember that plant manager who didn't like entitled manager? He was at home at the time it happened, but he made it to the factory before truck driver was taken away in handcuffs. He personally dropped a few $100s and went around to everyone in the factory with a collections bag, asking them to donate to pay truck driver's bail fund. He had raised over 10 grand in less than an hour and had truck driver bailed out in 3. Truck driver sued the company for emotional damages, discrimination, and a couple of other things. Then he retired with the money he got from the case. There were a lot of people who backed up his word that entitled manager started it. And as for entitled manager, he was fired before he woke up from his surgery's anesthetic. The plant manager personally drove almost an hour on his day off to tell entitled manager the good news in person, and then waited for him to wake up just to make sure he got it. He applied to several other management positions in the local area, but he had burned a crap ton of bridges during his life, and no one would hire him. Entitled manager now works as a food vendor at a traveling carnival. I still see him once a year when the carnival comes to town, and he scowls at me every time like I personally ruined his life. That look is the only reason I still go to that carnival. Do this next. Tap here on your screen to come see our new podcast playlist, where you'll find thousands of hours of the best stories you've ever heard. Or tap the one on the right. That episode is specifically just for you, based on other videos you've enjoyed the most.